We have three powerful speakers. The first is Peter Kirby, who has written this book. It's about 600 pages long, and it goes into the history of the scientists who developed the techniques of geoengineering and explains how geoengineering can be used to make money. Um, it's a fascinating story. I really enjoyed it. It is somewhat technical, but it contextualizes why anyone would be spraying things at us or using electromagnetic fields to affect the weather. Our second speaker is Marvin Herndon, who earned a PhD in nuclear chemistry from Texas A&M in 1974. And Marvin has spent the last 15 years studying geoengineering, often along with a physician friend from Florida, and understanding various aspects of it. He's published dozens of papers and will talk particularly about how an odd UN treaty that was allegedly going to protect us from geoengineering actually enabled geoengineering to occur legally. Our third speaker is Ginny Silcox, another scientist who has worked for the US government on electromagnetic fields and instrumentation. She is she had a high level clearance. She knows a lot about what really goes on, and she tells us as much as she is able about the electromagnetic weapons and uses they are being put to for geoengineering. So with that, I'm going to give you our three speakers. Grab a pen and pencil, make some notes, and settle back for an hour.
Hi, I'm Peter Kirby, author of the book Chemtrails Exposed, a New Manhattan Project, and a staff writer at Activist Post. I have with me today a world-famous PhD by the name of Marvin Herndon. He has about 30 peer-reviewed, published journal articles about SRM geoengineering, also known as the lines in the sky. He is also the author of the book, Chemtrails Are Not Contrails. Dr. Herndon, please say hello.
Hi there. I'm glad to be here.
Great. And I also have with me Ginny Silcox. She is a career scientist who has held a Q clearance with the Department of Energy, and she was the science editor of my book. Ginny, please say hello.
Hello, everyone.
So many of you out there may ask, what is SRM geoengineering? Well, this is what the establishment calls it. The common term for it is chemtrails. I often refer to it as the New Manhattan Project. And it is mostly evidenced by these lines in the sky that we see. Now, I remember when I was a kid, I would look up at a plane on a relatively cold day, and it would be high in the sky and it would have a tiny little tail on it, and it would disappear very quickly. And I'd look up at it and I'd say to my friend, I'd say, hey, look, that plane has a little tail on it. At the time, I didn't know what that was. I later learned that that is an actual contrail, where a plane is using unadulterated jet fuel, and the condensation trails emitted from the back of the plane disappear very quickly in the matter of a few seconds. But today, we have these gigantic lines that are sprayed out of aircraft routinely, and they just stay there in the sky from horizon to horizon, often forming grid patterns, and then they'll expand and float and create a cloud cover, an artificial cloud cover. Now, people, that's not the way water vapor behaves. The establishment tells you it's just water vapor, but that is the way particulate matter behaves. Now, that's just opening the door to what's going on here. I've spent $10,000, 10 years, upwards of 100 interlibrary loans, thousands of photocopies, read hundreds of books, and compiled and exhibited the evidence, mostly the scientific history. Evidence presented in my book indicates that the lines in the sky are a product of operations primarily designed to modify or control the weather. What I call today's New Manhattan Project has roots going back into ancient history, as man's desire to influence weather has been a recurring theme throughout the millennia. With the growth of institutionalized science in the late 1800s, the foundations of today's operations were formed. During World War II, with the birth of the scientific military-industrial complex, many of the technologies that have gone into today's operations first came into being. Immediately following World War II, the conventional cloud seeding industry, which openly sprays us today with toxic silver iodide, began operating domestically. This was celebrated in the press. But simultaneously, evidence indicates that a larger, secret military program was being built that aimed for more comprehensive weather control. In the decades following World War II, this second-generation weather modification project was steadily developed, and initial reports indicate that today's large-scale domestic spraying operations began in the mid-1990s. Control of the weather means big money and power. Weather's influence upon America's economy is measured annually in the trillions of dollars. Weather control can give militaries tremendous battlefield advantages. A whole industry and branch of academia known as geoengineering has sprung up around today's operations. Financial markets worth tens of billions of dollars, such as the weather derivatives market, rise and fall with the weather. This is why all of this is being done. I implore you to buy and read my book in order to get many of the historical details. But I am not an expert on science. Ginny and Marvin are experts on science. So in order to lend credibility to the fact that we are being sprayed, there's still a lot of people out there that don't understand this. We have these two career scientists today to explain what is going on here and put it in the context of how this harms food production. Now, we have already compiled lots of evidence, as you will see, and also if you read my book, but there is much more to be done. We are just scratching the surface here. This is a secret project. We don't know many of the details. We have observed many things, and we have put that in the context of lots of historical scientific literature, and there are continuing experiments going on to try to determine exactly what is going on here. We don't have all the answers. We're just on the cutting edge of exposing all this. But we do have a lot, and so let's get to Marvin Herndon here, and let's look at what he has. He's been studying this for a long time, very passionately, and I think his evidence is extremely compelling, and it deserves to be considered seriously. So, Marvin, will you please start with your presentation?
Thank you, Peter. Since the 1990s, at least, concerned scientists have witnessed those white trails you speak of that streak across the sky, put in place by jets, that begin to come apart and spread out, and from momentarily even resembling cirrus clouds before becoming a white haze. Official sources, both in the United States and throughout Europe, say the same thing, the same lie, ice crystal contrails. Well, the behavior is not at all like ice crystals, especially in the environments where they're sprayed. That's the behavior of particles. And over time, the jet spraying has increased, not just an occasional thing, but becoming a near daily, near global event, what is being sprayed, why, and how harmful is it? These are the questions that I started to ask, and I'll explain the rationale and the discoveries made and what the results were. Concerned citizens, this is before I became interested, concerned citizens took post-rainwater samples, took them to commercial labs and had them analyzed. Usually they only requested aluminum analyses. Sometimes they also requested barium and occasionally also strontium. Well, the lab results did not mean that those were the elements being sprayed. From a scientific standpoint, what that meant was that clearly a substance was being sprayed into the sky that allowed atmospheric moisture to extract those elements in a dissolved form. What could that be? Not a natural product, because all of the rainwater, previous rains would have taken and dissolved them away. Now, this was an industrial waste product with such a property, coal fly ash. And when coal is burned industrially, the heavy ash falls beneath, while the light ash is formed in the vapors above. And this light ash, called coal fly ash, contains most of the toxic elements, things that are too toxic to be allowed outside of smokestacks. Mercury, arsenic, beryllium, barium, it goes on and on. Well, in Western nations, since at least 2011, maybe before, it was required that these be trapped and sequestered in ponds. Well, it seemed hard to believe that officials worldwide would be taking these particles that were trapped and jet spraying them and poisoning the planet, including the air we breathe and the soil. It just seemed unbelievable. But I set out to prove whether that was the case or not. Now, you can compare a small quantity in one circumstance to quantities in another circumstance by using ratios. Then the different volumes become insignificant. They don't count. And so what I did was I made ratios, one number divided by another, of the aluminum, barium, and strontium that was published on the internet, and compared those to scientific data on coal fly ash water extractions that had been published in the scientific literature. Bingo, a match. Well, further data confirmed this coal fly ash identification. When snow falls, the first snowfall, it catches all the little particles and brings it down. And so by capturing the first snowfall after the aerial spraying, you can take the snow, let it melt, evaporate the rainwater, and measure the residue. And there's another thing you could do, and that nature helped us. In northern regions such as Wisconsin and Canada, snow mold forms on top of grass beneath snow. Snow mold is a white web-like substance that's very sticky. And so when the snow starts to melt, the particles that it traps, it drops and then become trapped on the snow mold. So you can measure the snow mold and compare that to laboratory measured results of coal fly ash. And that's what we did. And a lot of bingos here. There were maybe 20 or more pairs of elements that had a pretty good match to the average range of compositions of coal fly ash, both from European coal fly ash and American coal fly ash samples. What kind of an evil monster would poison the air we breathe, damage our food sources, and damage our agriculture and pollute the earth? Well, to answer this question, we first need to consider the properties and behavior of aerosolized coal fly ash. Aerosolized meaning sprayed in the region where clouds form by jets. Well, coal fly ash sprayed into the region where clouds form, it devastates crops and livestock and poisons the soil. Well, this has been going on up and down the coast in California for more than a decade. And so the California provides a good example to describe the properties of coal fly ash, aerosolized coal fly ash. Coal fly ash causes drought. And the reason it does is because the little particles, the fine particles of coal fly ash, block water droplets so that they cannot get together to coalesce to become massive enough to fall as rain. Well, eventually the atmosphere will become saturated, and then you'll have downpours, floods, deluges. In the California case, that's often moved away from the spraying on the West Coast because the airflow moves from west to east. So you might get the flooding in the Midwest, for example, a big agricultural zone. Well, the particles placed into the air where clouds form absorb sunlight, and they absorb radiation from the Earth's surface, and they become heated. Well, this heat has two consequences. One, it heats the air in the immediate region, and that reduces convection. Convection is the up-down circulation of air, where it goes from the warm to the cold and in a circulatory motion. And it depends upon the temperature difference. Well, if you reduce the difference in temperature, you reduce convection. Where there's no difference in temperature, by definition, there's no convection. Well, this is the process where a lot of heat is removed from the surface through convection. So if you reduce the convection, you have local heating and you have global heating or global warming. Another thing that heating the environment does, it creates a high pressure zone. Weather moves by virtue of pressure differences. So if you create a pressure zone along the coast of California, it acts like a wall because the incoming moisture from the Pacific would normally cross into California and rain. Well, it runs into a high pressure front. And so it just is deflected and moves upward, leaving the state in a state of drought without the normal moisture. Well, this is, of course, debilitating to plants. I mean, this desiccation has caused agricultural problems all up and down the state. And it's just one of the consequences. Another consequence of coal fly ash is that it reduces sunlight. And by reducing sunlight, that also adversely affects agriculture. And one way it does is by diminishing photosynthesis. Increased air temperatures, the warming, the global warming, the man-made global warming diminishes photosynthesis. It reshapes the enzymes that aid in the photosynthesis development. It also alters natural weather patterns. So in agricultural communities are generally based upon prevailing weather patterns. But now by persistently spraying these particles into the air, it changes the natural weather patterns and maybe makes the weather not quite so hospitable for the agricultural plants. But there's another even more devastating problem. Recall the first analyses that were made from rainwater after coal fly ash contained aluminum. Aluminum was a prominent extracted element from coal fly ash. Well, throughout natural history, aluminum has been tied up with oxygen. It doesn't really occur freely or in a dissolved state on the earth. And so creatures of the earth have never developed a natural immunity to chemically mobile aluminum. So the aluminum that is being added to the water is a chemically mobile aluminum. The water, for example, moisture or even fog lands on plants and gradually enriches the concentration and drips down and poisons the roots. The rare Torrey pines in California are being decimated, and this is how it's happening. And the poisons make the plants more susceptible to aggressive pests, like bark beetles, for example, or all sorts of agricultural beetles, weakens the plants. But moreover, it poisons the soil with chemically mobile aluminum. Coal fly ash, aerosolized by jet spraying, kills beneficial insects, bats, and birds. It exacerbates pests, not pets. It exacerbates wildfires. California has had lots of wildfires. And another thing that it does is it exacerbates ultraviolet plant damage. You all probably know that in 1987, the United Nations finalized the Montreal Protocol to prevent damage to the ozone layer, which was happening, allegedly caused by refrigerant gases. Well, since that time, the ozone problem has gotten a lot worse. And what Mark Whiteside and I discovered is that the culprit was not refrigerant gases, but coal fly ash. Now, coal fly ash is an industrial waste product. So there's a lot of effort has been expended to do things to that product to make it more amenable for commercial use, such as in cement. One of the simplest ways to alter the structure of coal fly ash is with ozone. Consequently, there's an incredible amount of data on the different ways that coal fly ash kills ozone. Well, coal fly ash is jet sprayed into the troposphere near the edge of the stratosphere. But materials there don't just stay there. Well, they tend to fall down in the troposphere, but air movement of various sorts, cyclones, upwelling, can push some of that stuff up into the stratosphere. And this is what is killing ozone. This material gets trapped, and it gets trapped as ice crystals, and it gets in over the Antarctic, for example. And in the spring, the ice crystals melt, and it exposes the coal fly ash to the ozone, and you end up with an ozone hole. Well, the problem's gotten a lot worse. It's not just the ozone hole, the famous ozone hole over the Antarctic, but now there are ozone holes over the Arctic and even occasionally in the tropics. So with the jet spraying of toxic coal fly ash into the air we breathe, now being a near daily, near global activity, what is the legal justification? Why do virtually all of the major nations glom onto it and do it and allow it to be done in secrecy? Well, many people read a scientific article or a legal document just to get the gist. Well, I learned a long time ago that if one wants to really understand a document, you read one sentence at a time, not proceeding to the next before that sentence is fully understood. Well, this is the way I discovered the fraudulent, misleading United Nations International Treaty that is the legal, or I would say pseudo-legal, basis for the aerial coal fly ash spraying. Jurisprudence and common sense dictate that the title of any international agreement should describe its content and should describe it precisely. But there's a notable exception. In 1978, the United Nations entered into force an international treaty entitled Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Other Hostile Use of Environmental Techniques. This, I assert, and my colleague Mark Whiteside also asserts, is a Trojan horse. It does not do what the title says. It does not prevent environmental warfare. It never used the word shall in that connection. But it did use the word shall numerous times in surreptitiously mandating participation in environmental modification for peaceful purposes. Well, the scientific evidence that points to the melting of ice, melting of polar ice, for establishing new navigational routes and to get at the mineral resources beneath the ice as the so-called peaceful purpose. But what harm to food, agriculture, and life can ever be deemed peaceful? Well, the evidence came from a momentary mistake. In February of 2016, I read in the news that a mysterious aircraft had at night released some substance that speckled pieces of property, 7 pieces of property in Michigan. Well, I quickly made contact with one of the homeowners who graciously provided samples and information. And what I discovered is the following. There's a substance called cryoconite that occurs naturally. It's a mixture of debris, mineral and biological, and that tends to collect on top of glaciers, and it absorbs sunlight and melts into the glacier. And it appeared that that was the purpose of this scattered material, because the scattered material is like a synthetic cryoconite. It's because it's made of plant parts, coal fly ash, salt, and some oily substance that I didn't get a chance to get analyzed. Well, melting polar ice is consistent with the aerosolized emplacement of coal fly ash where clouds form, which causes global warming. Now, you've heard in the same period that this Trojan horse has been operational since 1978. The United Nations began a program solving the problem of global warming and advising countries about that solution. And of course, what they alleged is that greenhouse gases trapped heat that caused global warming. Well, the hundreds of scientists that worked on that, not one of them ever mentioned the jet spraying or the consequences. They just simply looked at the radiation balance between sun and earth, not considering the removal of heat from the surface by convection or the consequences of coal fly ash heating the top of the troposphere, reducing the temperature difference and suppressing convection. In other words, causing global warming. So what can we do to save our food supply, our agriculture, and indeed life on this planet? Well, Mark Whiteside, MD, MPH, and I have published dozens of articles in the peer-reviewed scientific and medical literature about the adverse consequences of aerosolized coal fly ash on agriculture, the global demise of forests, beneficiating harmful algae, harming insects, birds, and bats, as well as human medical adversities, including respiratory disease, COPD and lung cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and cardiac disease, and more. Twice we submitted perspectives to the Bulletin of the World Health Organization, warning of the health risks of the aerial coal fly ash spraying. Each time, our submission was rejected, totally without benefit of peer review. So what can we do to save food, agriculture, and life? Globally, terminate the United Nations. It is so deeply involved in everything that is wrong with this planet, with the state of agriculture, with the state of understanding of our planet. The only way I see is simply on a nation by nation basis to terminate association with the United Nations. Nationally, there are other things we could do. For example, establish a technology bill of rights. Now, a little more than 200 years ago, when the United States of America was brand new and had a brand new constitution, the framers of that constitution realized that the states would not ratify it because, as it stood, there were no protections against the government becoming oppressive and suppressing all of the things that we deem inappropriate. So to solve that problem, they enacted 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments, which is called the Bill of Rights. And I'm sure you're familiar with those, which include the right of free speech, the right to bear arms, etc. Well, nationally, we need to establish a new Bill of Rights, a technology Bill of Rights that prohibits institutions, governments, people from using technology and broad resources to manage or mismanage or control our planet, or the way we communicate with one another, or operate in our health systems. You see, when computers came out, it seemed like a wonderful thing. We could grasp information almost instantly. But it didn't take long for the powers to be to limit that information and to spoon feed the populace whatever the so-called deep state globalist wanted them to learn. News reporting was perverted. But establishing a technology Bill of Rights for each nation would be one way to proceed, although not a very rapid way. Perhaps more important is for organizations like this organization and others to spread the word, to insist that people tell the truth. You know, truth is a pillar of civilization. And this is the one enemy of the people who would do harm to our food supply, to agriculture, and to our way of life. So helping to get the word out and get the truth out is the best thing we can do at present. Thank you.